So my name is Kari Boyle. I work at the Athens City-County Health Department in Athens County, Ohio. I'm a certified health education specialist. I'm also the Creating Healthy Communities coordinator for Athens County. The Creating Healthy Communities grant is awarded to us from the Ohio Department of Health. And what we do with that is we work to increase access to healthy foods and physical activity opportunities in some priority communities that have been identified around the county. It's so important to know your community before you start a project. We really like to go with the phrase around here, nothing about us without us. So we could not do our work without working with the community first and really knowing who they are. We're a really rural community and we're made up of a lot of different communities that look very different. So it's important to know before you go into that community, what does it look like there? What's going on? Do they have any current issues that they're working on or focused on? Do they have a priority or a mission? Do they even have kind of a slogan for that community? So I really like to get to know the community first. You can definitely do your research online, but I think it's great maybe grab their newspaper if they have one, see if they have a Facebook page, and go to them, go to their meetings. One of the best ways in our area is to go to council meetings. There are city councils and village councils, township trustee meetings, and that's a great way to get a pulse on the community. And it's also important for them to get to know who you are. I never want to be someone who just comes into the community and says, hey, I have this project, I need you to do it, and then disappear. That doesn't work, and we've seen that, and we have that culture and apprehension down here from that. So first, I just like to get to know them, let them know who I am, what work I'm doing, and be able to offer help, but definitely framing it in a way of, yes, I do have this grant and I do have some limitations of what I can do, but I'm going to do the best that I can to make it fit what you all want. So any way you can get to know your community, I highly recommend it. Community-based participatory research is the way to go. And I think there are research methods within that to get to know your community. Depending on what the project is, we will do some assessments. So maybe going to the park, doing an observatory assessment of what's in the park and recording that. We can also do accessibility assessments, so a community health inclusion index, which kind of helps us know for all forms and abilities, how can you access that area. I think there's also a lot of great secondary data online through census data, community health rankings, to get to know that community. But my favorite way, of course, is surveying and those interview questions. I thought it was fun at our Nelsonville Community Parks and Rec meeting. We had so many different ways for people to participate. So you could take a paper survey, you could color us a picture, you could kind of stick Post-its up on boards answering questions, or you could just talk to us. We had all those ways and people just wanted to talk, which is great. I don't mind at all, but I think it's important to realize everybody kind of responds differently to getting that information. So I think it's really important to have all of those forms available. Just like when we did a park survey in Gloucester, we hosted a park meeting, had the paper survey. Not a ton of people showed up, that's fine. It was a busy afternoon, but we put that survey online and boom, within days we had 175 responses, which is interesting because every person I mentioned that to, they're like, really? That's a whole community. We don't have very many people. And wow, I can't believe that worked because that's requiring internet and we have a lot of broadband internet issues in our community. So I think you have to see what your community has access to and kind of make it fit them. When it comes to forming surveys, what do you ask? We usually always include, like I mentioned, that community and age piece, just so we can know what population we're working with. But when we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what we're asking, we like to ask questions like, what's your dream for this park? What would make you come to this park every day? Not very boring questions like, what would you like to see at your park? Or why don't you come to the park? Those are fine questions, but let's get imaginatory with it. Let's brainstorm and dream of all the things we can dream of. Because if I'm collecting information, I want to know all the possibilities that are out there. I wouldn't ask more than one page of questions, so I would just do a front sheet and have it really spaced out so it looks like it's not a lot of questions. And maybe work with your group that you're working with. prioritizing what do we want to ask. So I would maybe write down all the things you want to ask and then weed out and maybe highlight these are the most important for this specific project. And then you can also maybe combine questions to make it one question but gives you kind of two answers. For example, with that, it might be regarding safety or accessing a park. You could just ask, do you feel safe in this park? Or you could say, when you access this park, how are you doing that? And is it easy for you? If it's not easy for them, they'll probably bring up a safety issue without you having that in the question. It's also really important to think about the language that you're using. We want to keep it at a kind of a lower reading level because we want anybody to be able to read it, whether it's a very young individual or very old, any reading ability. So keep your language very simple and plain, and don't use any big words that are kind of confusing. And if you need to show a picture or reference anything in that, just think about the visibility of it if it's on a paper or if you were to do it online. So when we're doing different projects in communities, we definitely use mapping, and it can look a different way depending on what the project is. So mapping can be very helpful when you're planning out a project. I suggest using Google Maps. We use it a lot to get that aerial view of different parks, for example, when we're working on projects with that. It's very handy because you can kind of pinpoint things. You can actually measure distances on there and create a good aerial view of what you're doing. I recommend that too because that's really helpful when looking for other grant funding. People want to know what you're doing and they like that through pictures. It paints a better story. But another thing that we do that's very helpful depending on the community, we do just general kind of asset mapping, I would call it. So looking at that community, what food access points exist, whether it's a store or a pantry, can we pinpoint that on a map? Or are we talking about tobacco prevention? Can we pinpoint tobacco retailers? Or are we looking at here's our school and here's the distance to the park? It's nice to see an aerial of what that community setup is because that can also show you some barriers that might exist. For example, in Gloucester, working on that park project, that community has another one of those state routes going through it. And it's where you have the state route going through and the park is right next to it along the whole state route. Well, there also happens to be very popular areas like an ice cream store across the street from the park. So they were concerned about pedestrian safety and wanted to look at potential crosswalks. So we did some different mapping with the help of ODOT to determine where we could put those crosswalks and what it looked like. When we are working in the communities, we often use focus groups. And what we mean by that is talking specifically to a group of people, asking them certain questions about our projects. And that can look many different ways, and we've done it many different ways. But there are definitely things you want to keep in mind when you go about doing this. First and foremost is knowing your population. What's the best way to communicate with them? Does that need to be in person with informal interview questions? Does it need to be a survey? Are you working with youth? Maybe you need to add a fun activity to it or have some element of art to it. So some different examples of focus groups we've had. We really like community parks and rec meetings. And that's because those park and rec committees live within councils. So those are your elected officials. And I think sometimes people don't know how to engage with their elected officials or they don't know where those meetings are held. So we like to take that meeting directly to the park where we know people already are and they can come up to us, or we can, invite them through flyers and whatnot to come and have conversations with us. And usually in those types of meetings, we do all forms of communication that they could participate in. So verbal, written on surveys, answering questions or putting dots, voting on boards, or coloring pictures. Another fun way I'm really a big fan of is engaging the youth. They actually have a lot to say, and they're very, very smart. They know what they want, and they'll tell you. I just think it's really important to engage them in a fun way. So we've had activities where we've gone to the youth where they already are, And for example, we set up a trail mix bar. So we got to work with them to make healthy trail mix, but that whole time we were having conversation with them, asking their opinions and thoughts on things. We have some future things planning, working on like kid councils. The kids are our elected officials and decision makers, and we are going to present to them our update on the project like we would to council, and we're going to show them our options and have them vote on it. So some other things that you can do is going and asking the city council, or whether it's a village council, anything like that, for more information, getting history on if you were working on a park project. So who owns the park? What does the land situation look like? What type of funding do they have? What are they planning to do? I think that's been very helpful for us because we don't have an established parks department down here. So everyone does it a little differently. Same with working with the schools or different work sites or businesses on healthy eating initiatives or whatever you want to work with them on. Everybody's operating under different circumstances, so it's really good to just assess their basic setup depending on what the project is. Sometimes when working on these projects and we are getting this information from the community, we might have something in mind or expect certain responses, and then we might get something completely different that kind of makes us have to step back and think, okay, maybe we need to change this project around because this isn't working out. I think something that's a really great example of this, when I first started working at the health department, we with the help of outside partners, submitted an application to get a bike spur into a village in our town or in our community. And this just means an extension of our bike path. And we worked with our county planner and engineers and ODOT and had a path in mind that we thought was going to work great. So we took this map to a community meeting, and instantly the community was like, oh no, that's not going to work because people already travel this way and go this way, and they would never do that. Well, that's really important to us because if we're going to be getting funding to put in a trail, we want it to be where people already go. We don't want them to have to go a different way because then they're probably not going to use it. And that could feel major. I mean, that's a big change, but it's not really because it's important to make it fit that community. It has to be what they want, so then it's an effective project for them. So if you are starting on a community project, I have probably just 3 basic recommendations to keep in mind. Get to know your community. Start those conversations early. I like to jump into that community and get to know them even before I mention the project. My grant year starts in January. I'm doing this in the fall of the previous year because I want to have my feelers out and them to feel comfortable with me before I throw my idea at them or work that out, that project idea with them. The second thing would be to engage the community. Engage, engage, engage. You cannot do this project without them. Have those conversations. If you're hosting a community meeting and people aren't coming, figure out why. Maybe you just need to go to that park and interview youth or people using the park and talk to them. Or you just need to find out where people already are. Go to them. My third piece of advice would be it takes time. You'd be amazed at how long or how quick some of these projects can happen, and just be patient with that. And have open communication with your partners as to why this project might be having some bumps or slowing down. But it will get done. We have lots of projects around here that have taken 5+ years, but it's worth it because they'll get done when they're supposed to happen. Don't be afraid of your big ideas because they're important. You are totally the expert in your community. Rely on that. You know what's needed. It's great to share that message too with other people. You never know other communities who might be trying to do the same thing or have been there. We have a lot of awesome communities in our area that are working on projects, and they have lots of tips and tricks that they've learned along the way. And don't be afraid to reach out to community partners. You can definitely reach out to the health department. We like to pass people on to other resources, but network. We have lots of people around. Don't be afraid to ask for help.